She carried a voice that could shatter your heart, and the words that explained exactly why. Stevie Nicks was never just a rock star. She was a force of nature, a poet, and for many, the very soul of Fleetwood Mac. Yet behind the platinum records and dazzling stage lights lay a life quietly unraveling. Now at 76, what remains is far from the fairy tale fans imagined. It's the sacrifice no one ever saw. Stevie Nicks was born in 1948 in Phoenix, Arizona. Her childhood was steeped in music, guided by her grandfather, Aaron Nicks, who not only taught her to sing, but also built her first guitar. By the age of 4, she was already performing beside him. That early spark eventually led her to Lindsey Buckingham, whom she first met in 1966 at a youth gathering where they sang "California Dreamin'" together. That single song changed the course of everything.
2 years later, Lindsey called Stevie out of the blue and invited her to join his San Francisco folk rock band, Fritz. They soon opened for legends like Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jefferson Airplane. Before long, Stevie and Lindsey became more than just bandmates. They were partners in both life and music. But that partnership was never truly equal. In 1973, the duo released Buckingham Nicks. The album was a commercial failure. To keep them afloat, Stevie worked as a waitress, a dental assistant, even a house cleaner, while Lindsey immersed himself in writing and producing. She promised her father that if nothing changed within 3 months, she would walk away from music entirely. She never had to make that choice.
On New Year's Eve of 1974, they got the call that would alter everything. Fleetwood Mac wanted them. The rumors that would break her. In 1975, everything shifted for Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Buckingham. After years of rejection, financial strain, and failed records, they were asked to join Fleetwood Mac. It wasn't guaranteed, though. Keyboardist Christine McVie had the final say on whether another woman could enter the band. Stevie later recalled, "I hoped she'd like me." Christine didn't just like her, she embraced her. The chemistry was electric, the lineup unstoppable. Their first album together, Fleetwood Mac, soared. Stevie's songs Rhiannon and Landslide became instant radio anthems. But the band hadn't even begun to scratch the surface of what they could create or destroy together. Just 2 years later, in 1977, they would release Rumors, one of the greatest albums in rock history. But behind that brilliance was pure chaos. By then, Stevie and Lindsey's relationship had imploded. She described the end simply, "We had a very bad fight, and I walked away." But walking away didn't mean separation. They still had to record, tour, and write together. Dreams, Stevie's most famous song, was a message to Lindsey. His reply was, "Go your own way." Millions sang along. Stevie lived every lyric in pain. While Rumors was being recorded at the record plant in Sausalito, California, tensions reached unbearable levels. Cocaine flowed freely, emotions ran wild. Stevie began an affair with drummer Mick Fleetwood, who at the time was going through a divorce from Jenny Boyd, the sister of George Harrison's former wife. The affair was brief and chaotic. Mick was emotionally raw. Stevie was emotionally reckless. She was also still involved with Don Henley from the Eagles. Looking back, Stevie blamed the drugs. "It was a doomed thing that caused a lot of pain," she said. Mick, on the other hand, called it a moment of love that couldn't breathe in public. Either way, it cracked the already fragile foundation of the band. The irony was brutal. Rumors became one of the most successful albums in music history. Over 40 million copies sold, 4 top 10 singles, and a Grammy for Album of the Year. But inside the studio, things were collapsing. John and Christine McVie's marriage ended. Lindsey seethed in resentment. Stevie tried to disappear in her own writing, but even that couldn't shield her. What made Rumors timeless wasn't just the music, It was the pain. Stevie Nicks gave the world everything she had inside her, and it nearly destroyed her in return. 4 pregnancies and a wedding she never wanted. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, Stevie Nicks was everywhere. Her voice was on every radio station. Rumors had become one of the best-selling albums of all time, and she was laying the groundwork for her solo debut. The world saw a woman at the top of her game. But behind the eyeliner and stage smoke, her personal life was unraveling in silence. During those years, Stevie became pregnant 4 times. One of those pregnancies was with Don Henley, co-lead singer of the Eagles. She chose to terminate them all. It wasn't a political statement. It was, in her words, a heartbreaking necessity. "If I had had a child," she later told The Guardian, "I would have had to walk away from everything. And I knew the music I was making was going to help people." She saw her work not just as entertainment, but as healing. "Maybe my mission wasn't to be a mom and a wife," she said. "Maybe my mission was to write songs that made moms and wives feel better." Still, the decisions left scars. In a rare moment of brutal honesty, Stevie once confessed, "To give up 4 babies is to give up a lot that would be here now." Her voice cracked when she said it. But the greatest loss of her life wasn't a romantic partner or a child. It was her best friend. Robin Snyder, Stevie's closest confidant, was diagnosed with leukemia in 1981. By a tragic twist of fate, Robin also became pregnant around the same time. Though doctors offered treatment options, she refused anything that might hurt the baby. She chose motherhood over her own survival. Robin died just 2 days after giving birth to her son, Matthew. For Stevie, the grief was unspeakable. "I was completely and utterly grief-stricken," she told Oprah. And in that grief, she made a decision that shocked everyone. She married Robin's widower, Kim Anderson, just 3 months after the funeral. Her reasoning was emotional, not romantic. "I thought I could take care of Matthew. I thought that's what Robin would want. But the marriage was built on mourning, not love." Stevie later admitted it was a completely ridiculous thing to do. 8 months later, they divorced. She said she felt Robin's spirit urging her to leave, as if even in death her friend knew the weight Stevie had placed on herself. Stevie never remarried. Addiction, numbness, and the lost decade. By the mid-1980s, Stevie Nicks was no longer just a rock star. She was an institution. She had already helped Fleetwood Mac sell tens of millions of albums, launched a wildly successful solo career with Belladonna, and become a symbol of feminine power in a male-dominated industry. But behind the velvet and lace, behind the Grammy stages and gold records, she was falling apart. Years of emotional stress, endless touring, and toxic relationships had driven her to the edge. Her cocaine addiction was not a whisper. It was public. It was destructive, and it was killing her. "It was the first thing I thought of in the morning," she later admitted, "and the last thing before I went to bed." She once described doing so much coke that I'd have to hold on to the floor so I didn't fall off. In 1986, she was diagnosed with a 1/4-inch hole in the septum of her nose. A plastic surgeon gave her a horrifying warning. The next hit could cause a brain hemorrhage. That was the wake-up call. She checked herself into the Betty Ford Clinic in Palm Springs. After 30 days of intensive rehab, Stevie walked out drug-free. Or so she thought. In the months that followed, a psychiatrist prescribed her Klonopin, a benzodiazepine intended to help her manage anxiety and prevent a relapse into alcohol abuse. What followed was arguably even worse than the cocaine years. "It just turned me into a zombie," she said. Klonopin numbed her completely, not just physically, but creatively, emotionally, and spiritually. For the next 7 to 8 years, she wandered through life in a daze. She gained weight, her hands began to tremble, her sharpness dulled. She stopped writing music. "It took away all my wonderful drama, my tempestuousness.
my compassion, my empathy, she told The Guardian in 2007. All those things that drove me to my piano. The woman who had once channeled raw emotion into iconic songs like Landslide and Silver Springs could no longer feel anything. By 1993, Stevie knew she was fading. She checked into another rehab, this time to get off Klonopin.
It took 47 days, and she later described it as far more horrific than detoxing from cocaine. She emerged clean, but shaken. Her body was older, her voice more fragile, her career had suffered. But more than anything, she had lost nearly a decade she could never get back. "They stole my 40s, she said simply. It was 8 completely wasted years of my life. The fallouts that never healed. Even after clawing her way out of addiction, Stevie Nicks couldn't escape the emotional wreckage left behind by decades of strained relationships, career power struggles, and unspoken resentment. She was sober, but she wasn't free. At the heart of it all was Lindsey Buckingham. Their relationship, once an intoxicating mix of love, obsession, and creative fire, had decayed into something tense and occasionally dangerous. In 1987, just as Fleetwood Mac was preparing for their Tango in the Night tour, Lindsey blindsided the band by announcing he was quitting. According to Nicks, a heated confrontation followed, during which she ran at him in fury. He allegedly chased her outside and slammed her against a car. "I thought he was going to kill me," she said years later in a 1997 interview. He eventually returned to the band in 1996 for the dance reunion, but the damage was already done. The chemistry on stage may have looked magical, but behind the curtain, decades of hurt, jealousy, and unresolved tension still hung in the air.
By 2018, it came to a final breaking point. After a minor disagreement about tour timing and a perceived slight during an awards show, Nicks reportedly told the band it was him or me. He was fired. Buckingham was blindsided. "None of it makes sense to me," he told Rolling Stone. "Fleetwood Mac, the 5 of us together, is a sacred thing." But sacred, Stevie had learned, didn't mean safe. Not anymore. Her fallout with Lindsey wasn't the only fracture that never healed. The success of her solo debut, Bella, in 1981, a chart-topping, platinum-selling triumph, was met with cold silence from the men around her. Lindsey reportedly tossed the album on the floor without saying a word. Her own father told her no man would ever marry a woman that successful. "They were all jealous," she recalled bitterly. "All of them." Over time, Stevie came to realize that the more powerful she became, the more isolated she felt. There was no husband waiting backstage.
No children to ground her. No consistent home where she could drop the persona and just be Stephanie. Yes, she had money. Yes, she had fans. But when the tour buses pulled away and the lights dimmed, what she often returned to was silence. The applause always fades. And for Stevie, the echoes it left behind were often lonelier than the quiet itself. A voice fading into silence. Today, Stevie Nicks is 76 years old. She's still alive, still performing, still iconic. But everything now moves slower, speaks softer, and weighs heavier. In March 2019, just one day after she made history as the first woman to be inducted twice into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, this time for her solo work, Stevie collapsed. What should have been a victory lap turned into a medical crisis. She was rushed to an intensive care unit in Philadelphia, diagnosed with double pneumonia, severe flu, and low oxygen. She later described the experience as terrifying and disorienting. It wasn't just her body that felt vulnerable. It was her voice, the one thing she had protected all her life. She recovered, but the damage lingered. Her lungs were never quite the same.
And then, less than a year later, the CO-19 pandemic struck. A respiratory virus, targeting the very thing she could not afford to lose. Her fear wasn't abstract. Her mother, Barbara, had once been on a ventilator and suffered permanent vocal damage. Stevie knew what that meant. Once your voice is gone, she said, it's gone. In 2021, despite being fully vaccinated, Stevie canceled all of her planned shows for the year. "I'm being extremely cautious," she wrote to fans. "Because I'm older, I am at higher risk, and I cannot risk losing my voice." For someone whose identity is so deeply tied to her ability to sing, to speak, to cast a spell with her voice, that fear wasn't about retirement. It was about erasure. Now she lives mostly in seclusion. Her days are quieter. She doesn't go out often. Her inner circle has grown smaller, her public appearances more rare. Friends like Tom Petty and Prince are gone.
But in her heart, they still stay close. "I talk to them all the time," she told Variety. "I ask them to be with me when I write. I feel them there." She also says Robin, her best friend who died in 1982, still visits her. Once, while standing in her kitchen, she claims Robin's voice whispered that she was drinking too much Gatorade. It was giving her acid reflux. Her house is filled with candles, old scarves, handwritten lyrics, and framed memories. She never had children, never remarried. Most of her great loves have drifted into memory or silence. And though millions still admire her from afar, worshiping the witchy queen who gave us Rhiannon, Edge of 17, and Gypsy, the truth is this: Stevie Nicks, the woman, now lives in the very solitude her songs always hinted at. She gave the world her voice, but what did the world give her in return? Do you think Stevie Nicks found the life she deserved? Tell us in the comments. And if this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe for more true stories behind the spotlight.